Hello, this is Professor Lou, and this is our lecture about proteins. So let's get started. So we're going to be discussing the basics of proteins, the structure, the digestion and absorption of proteins, and their functions. So first, let's start with proteins being a major part of plant and animal tissues. They are essential to health. They do provide energy, as we discussed in previous lectures. A deficiency of protein results in something called wasting. Excess protein intake, which is a growing problem in the U.S., also has health consequences. The consequences are just different than deficiency, but there are health consequences to both deficiency and excess of protein intake. Here you see an amino acid structure. As you can see, there's a hydrogen, an amino group, an acid group, and a side chain. The side chain is unique to each amino acid. Here you have a very helpful chart. Really, for amino acids, it's all in the side chain. The side chain of an amino acid is sometimes called the R group and can be as simple as one hydrogen bonded to the carbon center or as complex as a 6-carbon ring bonded to the carbon center. And although each chain of the 20 amino acids is unique, there are some characteristics that are similar. And therefore, they can be classified into 4 different groups, and those are nonpolar, polar, acidic, and basic. And in this chart, you can see each group listed, its characteristics, names of the amino acids in the group, and an example of the structure. The proteins are sequences of amino acids. Sometimes you will see amino acids abbreviated AA. As we discussed, there are 20 different amino acids. 9 of them are essential amino acids, meaning the body cannot make them. 11 are non-essential amino acids, and the body can make those. So, essential amino acids must be obtained from the diet, since the body cannot make them. There are also conditionally essential amino acids. Now, those are non-essential amino acids that under certain conditions become essential. Certain conditions that create a situation where the body can't make them. Here you have a chart that shows essential amino acids and non-essential amino acids. In the non-essential amino acid list, you have certain starred amino acids, and those are the conditionally essential ones. So there are 100,000 different proteins in the human body. Let me just say that again because that's a big number. 100,000 different proteins in the human body. So different proteins are produced because there are 20 types of those naturally occurring amino acids that are combined into unique sequences to form polypeptides. And these polypeptide chains then fold into a 3-dimensional shape to form a protein. And here you have an illustration of that. So we're going to talk about the steps to building a protein. First, you have DNA transcription. Then you have RNA translation, and then you have the folding process. And this essentially forms a protein. So you can see here the folding process in this slide. Now there's also something called denaturation of proteins. And that's essentially this process going in reverse where the protein becomes denatured. And that can occur with cooking. That's a really common reason that proteins are denatured. So when a protein is denatured, it's exposed to a different environment, such as increased temperature, and that causes an unfolding into its single strand of amino acids. So this disrupts the shape, the protein unfolds and loses that shape, and it can be caused by a variety of things. We mentioned cooking, and cooking has, high heat and some other things, but acidic environments, alkalinity, high temperature, alcohol, oxidation, agitation are other common reasons a protein might denature. Let's go over protein digestion and absorption. So protein digestion really starts in the mouth. Just like carbohydrate digestion begins in the mouth, so does protein digestion. So in the mouth, this chewing process starts to mechanically break down proteins. In the stomach, the chemical digestion of protein begins from hydrochloric acid and the enzyme called pepsin. In the small intestine, polypeptides are broken down into amino acids, dipeptides, and tripeptides by protein digesting enzymes secreted from the pancreas. And then a variety of different transport proteins move the products from protein digestion into the mucosal cells. And some amino acids share that same transport system in there. The dipeptides and the tripeptides can enter the mucosal cells. Once inside, they are broken down into single amino acids. And those amino acids pass from the mucosal cell into the blood and travel to the liver. And the liver regulates the distribution of amino acids to the rest of the body. And then small amounts of dietary protein are actually just lost in the feces as waste as well. What happens if the body doesn't get enough proteins, if it isn't getting enough nutrition? And that can develop into, when it's protein deficiency, several syndromes. So a deficiency of protein, one syndrome is Kwashiorkor, and that is a very low protein diet. We have edema in this syndrome. In the feet and abdomen, we have poor skin health, we have slow growth, we have low muscle mass, and liver malfunction. So this is a situation where oftentimes when it happens, this isn't the only cause, but one cause can be, let's say that a mother has a baby and that she already had a child that was a little bit older, so it's maybe a toddler, and she had been breastfeeding that toddler, and now she has a new baby, so she's got to breastfeed the baby in order for the baby to have a chance to survive, right? And so the older child, who's not really that much older, now goes on the diet that's available. And often that can be a low protein diet in some situations. If that diet is extremely low in protein, then the child is really losing out on nutrition at this point, that older child. And when that happens, they can develop Kwashiorkor. So it is a deficiency protein syndrome, of course, can be deadly, and often these children will develop a swollen abdomen, they'll have very thin limbs and swollen feet, and this is a protein deficiency disease. And then we have marasmus. So marasmus is another syndrome that does happen when people have a low protein diet and also low calorie diet. So they're not getting much of anything at all typically. And they will have extreme emaciation, poor skin health, slowed growth, fatigue, and very low weight. And so marasmus and Kwashiorkor can occur in the same person, often does occur in the same person, and this can be very deadly situations where there's just not enough nourishment for the person to survive. And it happens to lots of children, unfortunately. So globally, 1/3 of all child deaths are attributable to malnutrition. That's a huge number. Without proteins, a person can't build bone, skin, muscles, hormones, antibodies. So you can see how this would be a potentially fatal situation when there's not enough protein. So amino acids are really recycled in the body. So when we think about the body's inability to do things without enough protein, this is one of the reasons why, because this is the process that's going on in the body that isn't possible when there's not enough protein around. Dietary proteins during digestion are broken down into an amino acid pool. And that amino acid pool is used for energy production, for the synthesis of glucose or fatty acids, and for the synthesis of non-protein molecules that contain nitrogen, okay? And then the body can build proteins, okay, from this amino acid pool. And so over on the right, it shows body proteins have been formed. Then those body proteins can also be broken down and put back into the amino acid pool and used for energy production, synthesis of glucose or fatty acids, synthesis of non-protein molecules that contain nitrogen. So if there's not enough dietary proteins, right, the body could start breaking down body proteins and using them for energy. That's one of the things that can go awry, right? If there is not enough dietary protein, the body cannot form the protein synthesis that it needs. The protein synthesis is the body forming the proteins. It can't do that. So it can't, for example, in a child, allow proper growth, because how can the body properly grow without the proteins it needs to form body proteins that are necessary for growth and development? So this is why, protein is so essential to building new tissue, to survival of a human being. So at at least 10% of the diet should come from protein, and no more than 35% of calories should come from protein, so between 10 and 35. And the recommended dietary intake of protein does vary by age, okay? So infants, children, males and females, and adolescents, and males and females as adults have different dietary needs for protein. Here you see the RDA and the AMDR for different age groups and genders. The sources of proteins are seafood, poultry, meat, peas, eggs, nuts, soy, and dry beans. And so those are the things that we need to have in this diet to get the between 10 and 35% of the diet of protein that we need. So the functions of protein are to form collagen, which gives skin and bone their elastic strength. This is one reason when you have a deficiency of protein, the skin suffers. Keratin, which is the primary constituent of hair and nails. So protein functions to form those. And often you will see signs of malnutrition and protein deficiency with the hair and the nails. It'll be obvious the hair is falling out or it's very thin, the nails don't look normal. Then you have the motor proteins, which turn energy into mechanical work. So functions of protein continued are antibodies, which are blood proteins that attack and inactivate bacteria and viruses. So this is part of the body's immune response. And then enzymes that catalyze or speed up chemical reactions. Every cell contains thousands of types of enzymes, right? And these enzymes are very, very important. So when an enzyme is doing its work, this is what it does. Enzymes catalyze, speed up reactions that make or change substances or reactants. So the first step of that is reactants bind to the enzyme active site, okay? They're going to bind to that. And then the active site changes shape, resulting in a better fit with the reactants. And then the enzyme maneuvers the reactants so that they quickly bind together and form a product. And then the product is released and the enzyme returns to its normal shape. And after releasing the product, the enzyme's available for another reaction. So they're very, they keep going, they keep giving, they keep working. They go from one catalyzing event to the next one. And then enzymes catalyze reactions that break down molecules too. And this is also really important in the body. A molecule of sucrose binds to an enzyme's active site, for example. And the enzyme breaks the glucose-fructose bond in the presence of water. And then the enzyme releases the glucose and the fructose, right? And then the enzyme returns to its normal shape and is available for another reaction. So you can see how this would be happening all the time in the body in order to help us digest and absorb food. Other functions of proteins: hormones, regulation of body processes, acid-base balance. Proteins help to maintain a stable pH by acting as buffers. This is very important. Acidosis and alkalosis occur when proteins are unable to fulfill their buffer function. Those can be very dangerous states for the human body. The proteins act as channels and pumps, allowing substances to flow through membranes, and they function as carriers, transporting important substances in the bloodstream. Proteins also help with fluid balance. They're found inside and outside of cells. So inside the cells, that's the intracellular fluid. Outside the cells, extracellular fluid. And then we have the intercellular fluid or interstitial fluid, which is between the cells, and the intravascular fluid, which is in the blood. And so we saw that picture of the child that had the very swollen belly, right? And so this is an example of the protein function of making sure fluid balance is correct gone awry because there's way too much fluid in the abdomen, right? And this is because there's not enough protein in the body for a protein to do the function that it has to regulate fluid balance. And that's why you get all that swelling. So blood proteins maintain appropriate fluid levels in the vascular system, and edema results when a diet lacks enough protein to maintain normal levels of blood protein. You'll get swelling caused by buildup of fluids between the cells. So another function of proteins is that carbohydrates and fats are protein sparing because the body prefers burning them for energy, but will burn protein for energy if necessary. So we don't want our body breaking down skeletal muscles or our heart muscle, even worse, for energy. We want it to burn carbohydrates and fats for that. But, one of the functions of proteins is to provide energy and glucose. So the body readies protein for use as energy through a process called deamination, which is the removal of the amino group from an amino acid. That's how it does that when it's going to do it. So complete and incomplete proteins are important to discuss. Complete proteins supply all indispensable amino acids, and animal proteins are complete protein. Soy protein is also complete. Incomplete and complementary proteins are a little bit different. They are low in one or more indispensable amino acids, and most of them are plant proteins. So in order to get the proper protein, a lot of vegetarians will combine complementary proteins, and we're going to see that in another slide. So 2 incomplete proteins can equal a complete protein, right? So you have 2 incompletes, you put them together, you get a complete. One makes up for the other's lack of specific essential amino acids, and the combination then provides the sufficient amounts of all the essential amino acids. Here's some examples of ways to do that in a vegetarian diet. Beans and corn or wheat tortilla. Rice and lentils. Rice and black-eyed peas. Pea soup with bread or crackers. Hummus with sesame paste. Pasta with beans. Peanut butter on bread. So you can see that when you're putting these complementary foods together, the whatever amino acid the foods are low in can complement each other and they get a complete. And so a lot of diets, like culturally specific diets that are vegetarian, will naturally do this. The population just naturally the diet has evolved such that they have complete proteins in the typical things they eat in a meal. Okay, so what about excess of protein? So excess of protein happens more in developed countries. Excess protein and energy are more common than protein deficiency in these places, and they may lead to undesirable health outcomes. What are those? Osteoporosis, cancer, obesity, and heart disease. Now, diets rich in animal protein are often associated with high intakes of saturated fat and cholesterol, so the independent effects of the protein and the fat are really hard to tease out when you're trying to study this, but we know that there's effects. For example, heart disease. The high saturated fat intakes have been associated with higher incidences of atherosclerotic plaques and hypertension. We already know that. We discussed it last time. And we're going to keep discussing it because it's so important to health. Osteoporosis. We have an excess calcium excretion that may occur with high protein and low calcium intakes, okay? So that's going to drive the increase of osteoporosis in that population if you have that going on. And so you'll have more fractures as people age, and those fractures contribute to their decline in health as they get older. Often if a broken hip happens, people don't really do well after a broken hip pretty often, and they tend to decline. And not long after that, they often pass away, not from the broken hip itself, but just from the deterioration of their overall health status when they had that insult of a broken hip. Cancer. Diets high in animal protein have been linked to pancreatic, colon, kidney, breast, and prostate cancers. These are common cancers. Obesity. Excessive protein intake often leads to dietary imbalance, increasing fat consumption while crowding out fruits and vegetables and grains from the diet. Does this sound like a standard American diet? Because it is a standard American diet. And do we have a lot of these problems in our society from our diet? Absolutely. This is just further evidence that this excess protein is contributing to these chronic diseases in our society. And it is happening in other parts of the world as well, often developed countries. All right. So thank you very much. Our next lecture will be about water and minerals. Thank you.